Hey there. This is Nate and Jen, Life Matters, and this is our episode 8. And tonight we're going to tackle the topic of being too busy. And we know that in our American lifestyle, a lot of times busyness is assumed like it's a good thing. We are a society of instant gratification and short attention spans and always being on the go.
Yeah,
But
for
we
sure.
feel like that's not always a good thing for marriages and families and individuals as well. So we wanted to tackle this topic with you tonight.
Yeah, I mean, being busy can really wear us down. And if we're not careful, it can, being busy in the wrong types of things can make it so the right things that we're doing are not getting the attention they deserve. So, this is a really important topic. And we want to stress that this particular topic tonight is first and foremost relating to married couples, but it certainly has application in families or, a single person in their life as well. So we're going to go through several items for consideration, and then we're also going to give you a few suggestions and make reference to a few biblical examples as well for your consideration.
Right. So we see all around us, a lot of people live lives that are just overloaded. They are always hurrying from one appointment to another, from one activity to another. They are low in energy. They feel like they don't have any
Mhm.
time. Sometimes that can lead to feelings of anxiety. And sometimes in a marriage, that can leave us feeling like we're giving our spouse the leftovers at the end of the day after work and all these other things. All we have left is, to fall into bed and
Yeah.
give a kiss on the cheek and do it all again tomorrow. So, how can we work on having a less busy life? And so, Nate, what are some symptoms of our society's busyness?
Well, I guess sleep issues could be one symptom. A lot of people are so worked up at the end of their busy day that they can't seem to relax. They have so many things on their mind. We always hear the joke that I wish there were more than 24 hours in the day,
Hmm.
and some people, let's be honest, they just decide, well, I've still got too much to do and my day is just about over with. So,
Hmm.
where do we cut? Well, I'll just cut sleep. I'll just get 5 hours of sleep. I can function, for 1 or 2 days on 5 hours. I'll just grind it out, and we feel drawn to just get everything on our checklist done. And certainly there are things that should be priorities in our lives that do need to get done. But we tend to stack up our plate, with too many items. It's
Hmm.
it's kind of like going through the buffet line, and you see some of these people have mastered the art of putting 3 plates worth of food, on one plate. And but then
Balance.
they sit down, and after they get going, they usually have way too much for them to handle. And if they
Hmm.
do cram it all in, well, that just causes more problems, and then it's a Pepto Bismol kind of a moment. So
Well, you mentioned sleep, but then you mentioned Pepto Bismol. So that made me think, what about our digestion issues in our society? Fast food, this and that. And, we'll have fast food once in a while, but this kind of hurried lifestyle can lead to a lot of dinners on the go, rushing around. And so you're not even having necessarily a healthy dinner
yeah.
or a dinner that you're enjoying. You're just kind of shoving it in your mouth as you rush to the next appointment. And so that's not another symptom that we can see from this issue. What about FOMO, fear of missing out? Sometimes that hashtag, I don't know, my kids might say that's old already, but there's this fear of missing out in society.
Yeah.
We've talked about comparison and looking to see what our neighbors are doing or other married couples, but sometimes I think that feeds into it. We think that we've got to be going all the time, or we have a boring life.
Yeah.
So that
Well, and
was.
everybody else is, overloaded, and so we almost seem kind of strange if we have nothing going on, or if we just, if we're not as busy as the next person. It seems like a lot of times we have conversations at work or with our family or with our friends, and one of the conversations is pretty much all the things that we're doing, and many times people will start the
Mhm.
conversation out with, oh man, I'm so busy, or oh, this week has been so busy, oh, this month has been so busy, this past year is so busy. And it's a conversation, starter. It's
Mhm.
it's more talked about than, say, sports or the weather sometimes, because it's just ingrained into our culture. Like, we don't want people thinking that we're not busy like everybody else. So
Yeah. And so our message tonight is to go counterculture, that we are going to give you permission to
yeah.
live a meaningful life, live a life that's calm. And a few years ago, I read this book called Margin. It's a really great book. I recommend it. It's written by a Christian doctor who started seeing a lot of symptoms of this hurried lifestyle in his patients. So that was mentally, physically, it was just wearing them down. And so that was kind of an eye opening book for me to read. And sometimes you just need permission to say, you know what, you don't have to keep up with the Joneses, and
Mm,
you can live a happy, calm life and be perfectly content and go against culture. And sometimes, even as believers, we fall into that peer pressure to keep up. So
yeah.
this is Nate and I saying tonight that it's okay to live a calm, happy life.
Yeah. And that book, Margin, what's the secondary title? I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's restoring emotional, physical, financial, and time reserves to overloaded lives.
By Richard A. Swenson,
Yes,
Swenson,
MD.
Margin. So yeah, maybe check that out. There's other good resources. I remember years ago, probably 20 years ago, or at least 15. And I'm not necessarily putting my stamp on this person's material in the church system that they're with, but I remember a book called Too Busy to Pray. I think it was by Bill Hybels, and he was just focusing on the prayer aspect, but he was talking about how American lives are just so busy. We're too busy to even pray. And if we do pray, it's more like, help me to sleep well. Please help me to not be sick anymore. Give me safe travels on this journey. Thank you for the food. It's just kind of just slapping these prayers together. And so there's a lot of books, from an emotional standpoint, sociological, spiritual standpoint. And just Google the topic, and you'll probably come up with a ton of resources for you to connect with. But it's about prioritizing your time together, as well as spouses, because we all have limited time. And
Mhm.
every couple's different, but a lot of couples, both spouses are working, and so some of their day is already spoken for, so you have even fewer hours and days of the week to manage. So you need to consider managing those things wisely. And overscheduling can lead to a lot of things. How about irritability,
Yeah.
anxiety, lack of sleep? Jennifer, she works in the social services field, and she's dealt with all kinds of different clients and needs that they have. So I know you can elaborate on those items there.
Well, sure. I mean, when we see these kinds of behavior issues, I mean, being irritable, there's a reason, right? So, in this situation, when we're talking about a husband and wife, like we said, sometimes if all we're giving our spouses the leftovers, and we feel like it's just another task on our list, and we're so exhausted,
Yeah,
that's really not building up your marriage. So,
sure. And there are several principles in scripture that we just want to touch on and encourage you to investigate these on your own. But, certainly one of the big principles that we find in scripture is the Sabbath principle. The Sabbath instituted by God, by the Father, by the Creator. And interestingly enough, that goes all the way back to the first couple of chapters of Genesis, and specifically the first few verses of Genesis chapter 2, noting that he rested from his labors, from his
mhm.
creative work on the seventh day, the Sabbath day. And we see that corroborated through scripture, even in the New Testament. But the Father understood, the Creator understands his people, and
Mhm.
knew that we needed at least one day of rest where we ceased from our typical labors, and we could have time of refreshing. But at the same token, I think sometimes people say, well, the scripture says, work, do your work 6 days and then rest on the Sabbath, which is true. But I've seen people going like gangbusters, overloading themselves for those 6 days. and they're so overloaded
Mhm.
that their priorities on those 6 days are out of whack. And by the time they get to the seventh day, the day of rest, they're so frazzled, or they're just so much in that crisis mode, that busy mode, that they can't
Mhm.
seem to even unwind on the Creator's day.
Right.
And, we do see a scriptural precedent many times where the Messiah himself went to a secluded place. He
Mhm.
went to get away from the masses. Yes, even the masses of people that he often ministered to, there were times when he needed to get into the boat and go to the other
Mhm.
side.
Yeah.
There were times, several times in scripture, in the Gospels particularly, where he went up onto the mountain,
Mhm.
the Mount of Olives. That many times it involved prayer, but typically he was secluding himself. And I guarantee that all of those times were not just on the Sabbath. I think there was probably several days in which it wasn't even the Sabbath, but he listened to his own needs. He listened to his body, his mind, his emotions. He was very in tune with making sure that he got rest when he needed it. So I think we have the freedom. Don't feel like, well, I have to go at a slave driver's pace for 6 days because the father said work 6 days, and then I can relax on the seventh day. I think that's a recipe probably for burnout, emotional, physical, spiritual burnout. So we need to take those cues during the week as well.
Mhm.
And every single day, let's be honest, we're only given the day, right? We don't have a promise for tomorrow or the next week or the next Sabbath. So let's make sure that we're prioritizing these things each and every day, being a good steward of our time and energy and, our spouse and our family. So,
I agree wholeheartedly. So we've come up with some suggestions to help if you are feeling like you're trapped in a cycle of busyness and you'd like to cut out some of the crazy, rat race. So one is to readjust your schedule, to really look at, maybe write down for the first time, what are you doing? Sometimes we don't even know because we don't visually
yeah,
see it. We just know we're going from one thing to another. But writing out on the calendar what you're doing and evaluating, is this all necessary, important? How did I get committed to these things?
yeah.
So readjusting your schedule.
Learning to say no. I think
Ooh.
sometimes as believers, we think, well, to be a good Christian or a good follower of Messiah, I can't say no to anybody. I mean, that wouldn't be kind to say no. I mean, I'm supposed to serve people, and so I just have to say yes to everything. But that doesn't even make good common sense, let alone
Right.
spiritual sense. And I don't see Jesus, the Messiah, as someone who went around just saying yes to everybody all the time.
Mhm.
I don't see that example in Scripture. He certainly told people no, and sometimes he told very pushy people,
Mhm.
no, this is not the priority.
Yeah.
Even in the situation with Mary and Martha, we have one sister who's just so busy, and she's just so
Mm.
concerned about
Good
all these
example.
different tasks. And the other sister is really dialing in to the master and sitting at his feet. And so I think there are many, many precedents in scripture that, speak to these things, but we need to learn to say no. And it's not that we're trying to be rude. We're not
Mhm.
telling people off. We're just saying, I'm not able to do that, or my schedule is full, or I'd love to help with that, but I have this priority, and feel free to say,
Mhm.
my family is expecting me tonight. We're having dinner together. I need, it's not a sin to say, I really need a time of rest this week. I'm just overloaded as it is.
Yeah.
Please forgive me. So we need to learn how to say no, to say it effectively, and to say it also in a kind and gentle way, but to be assertive enough that we don't allow ourselves to be manipulated into overloading ourselves. And let's face it, most people that are going to overload us are not necessarily going to overload us with stuff that's the Father's business, right? They're going to overload us with stuff that they're concerned about, which may not have anything to do with doing the Father's business.
Yeah. And so, sometimes we struggle with being people pleasers, and really we need to evaluate every opportunity. And sometimes that might mean saying no to good things so we can say yes to better things,
Yeah.
better uses of our time, because there are an unending um, number of options that we could be involved in at any given time. And so if we say yes to everything, we really
Yeah.
are going to be overloaded.
That is a really good point, because there are so many things that are good, but they may not be the best thing in the circumstance. And so we have to prioritize, we have to use discernment. We have to make sure to put the right things first. And scripture is clear. Are we trying to please men, or are we trying to please the Father?
Right.
And I think sometimes we just get into that trap of trying to be men pleasers, and because
Yeah.
we feel pressure and we want people to like us, and we want more responsibility. So we try to, be responsible in these things so that they'll give us more. And we just have to always ask ourselves the question, who am I trying to please by being busy? And if anything, if we'll mention this at the close, but if anything, we should be busy about the Father's items, first and foremost.
Right. So one way, if you struggle with saying no to people, um, is
Is to run
to
and hide. No, just kidding.
to wait 24 hours before accepting an invitation.
Mm,
And you can say, let me think about that. Let me pray about it. Um, and give yourself a little bit of time so you don't feel put on the spot to answer yes right away. And you can really evaluate whether you
yeah.
have time for this in your life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Don't allow people to pressure you on the spot. I need an answer yesterday. Well, that's nice, but I need to check my schedule. I need to talk. I need to consider my family's schedule. I need to pray
Mhm.
about it. Is this something I really need to add to my plate?
Yeah.
So,
Another suggestion to dealing with the struggle of busyness is to schedule in free time. So we put all these other appointments on our calendar, that have importance. So let's schedule in free time. Let's schedule in time to
mm,
relax. And there's nothing wrong with that. So blocking off some time on your calendar can be a way, if you're not seeming to have the time otherwise,
yeah.
and stick to it. Don't give it up.
And you can tell people, hey, I have a very important meeting that I need to go to. Maybe your important meeting is that you're just having lunch at the park, for 20 minutes, and you're going to spend a few moments in prayer after you eat, just to
Yeah,
kind of,
that's important.
refresh your priorities. And I'm not saying it's a sin for you to do a working lunch. I know a lot of times business is conducted during lunch, but let's face it, some people, they never take a break for lunch, and they're just constantly
Mhm.
doing their tasks, their responsibility, meetings. Maybe your lunch period is a good time, good thing during your day to try to block out. And maybe not all
Mhm.
the time, but as a general rule, take 30 minutes, 20 minutes to pause during the day, catch a breather, and refresh yourself, and make sure that your priorities are in line, and you're not taking on too much.
Good. Um, Another piece of advice, a suggestion is never add something to your schedule without first subtracting something else.
Ooh, that's a
So,
tough one.
yeah. So maybe once you've gotten your schedule, you've critically evaluated all the activities, and you know that these are the best things for you to be involved in. You just determine that I'm not going
Mm,
to add anything until something else is ready to drop off, or I'm willing to give up something else.
yeah, I never thought of that one until today. That's a really good suggestion. So we want to keep this short and sweet. We don't want to be too busy sharing with you about business, and we want to practice what we're preaching here. So if we're busy about anything, it really should be about the things that matter most in life, and the things that have to do with building up our spouse, caring for and equipping our family, our children, and of course, just being about the Father's business. And that doesn't mean that we can't have, a vacation, and we can't do some of the things that we enjoy to do. We can't have a hobby, because that would be, unchristian or whatever. But we are saying that the priorities need to come first. And
Mhm.
we do have a limited amount of time in our day, in our week, our month, our year. And so it just boils down to good stewardship of that. And we figured that this would be a very good topic because chances are good that 99.9% of the listeners are too busy with so many things. And so we want to just try to help you refocus, reprioritize, pray about these things, talk with your spouse if you're married, talk with your kids, if you're just running ragged, maybe your kids feel as well, because the kids feel pressure. And we'll probably do when we do a series coming up very soon on parenting, we will
Mhm.
add this topic of busyness, and we'll share some items related to families in general
Yep.
being busy. So, thank you guys so much for listening. This has been Life Matters with Nate and Jen, episode number 8. We are too busy. We hope that you've been blessed by this information, and we thank you so much for the encouragement that we have been given about this series. Again, if you have suggestions or if you want to reach out to us, send us a message at nate@firedfortruth.org. And we would like to receive some more questions or suggestions, probably coming up very soon whenever we can fit it in the schedule. We're going to consider doing one episode, which is mostly just questions that
Yeah.
people have.
Q&A. Yep.
Q&A. So if we get enough questions to do that, when we will do a Q&A. So right now we're soliciting those relating to marriage specifically. And in the next week or two, we'll be wrapping up this series of several lessons on marriage, and we'll be transitioning into parenting and family matters. So thank you so much for watching. We hope that you are well, and may you be blessed.